So some of you are probably wondering, hey, Barker, what about Dietrich Bonhoeffer? How come you haven't spoken about him in the Heroes of the Faith? Well, to be honest, his story is so massive. It's huge that I didn't even know if I should even bother trying to peg it in a small soundbite like this. But you should know about him because it's an amazing story. He was born on February 4th, 1906. He graduated to heaven on April 9th, 1945. He was a pastor, a Lutheran pastor during the Nazi years in Germany. He was known as a Nazi dissident, anti-Nazi dissident, and he was he was actually accused being part of a plot to kill Hitler. And his book, it's a book of his life, written by Erich Metaxas, called Bonhoeffer, tells that story. Amazing story. You can imagine the wrenching pressure on a pastor in those days to fight against evil and to do good. Anyway, he was, apart from his theological writings, which were some classics like The Cost of Discipleship, that if you haven't read it, you should read it. Bonhoeffer was known for opposing the Nazi regime right from day one, especially Hitler's euthanasia and genocide persecution of the Jewish people. He was very much anti that, and very vocal about it. Got him into trouble. He was arrested in 1943 by the Gestapo. He was imprisoned at Tegel prison for a year and a half, and then he was hanged in the prison just before the U.S. Army had liberated the concentration camp he was in. As I said, he was born in February 1906 in Breslau, Germany, into a large family. There was 8 children, and he and his twin sister Sabine were number 6 and 7. His father, Karl Bonhoeffer, was a neurologist, a psychiatrist, very smart man. His mother, Paula, came from, her dad was a well-known theologian. Her mother was a famous painter. The family dynamic for him enabled him to really get a good education, and encouraged in the arts, and all of this led to him to be a good leader, especially in church circles. But he was too young to be ordained at that point, at the age of 24, that he actually went to the U.S. to study in a theological seminary. But he actually said about the Union Theological Seminary in New York City, "There's no theology here," and he didn't live up to his German standards, but he had a life-changing experience there. He met some really good friends there, but everything changed when Hitler took power in 1933. Everything changed. He was a determined opponent of the Nazi regime from the outset, right from the first days. As soon as, it was like 2 days after Hitler got power, he went on the radio. Bonhoeffer went on the radio and delivered this message, a radio address, which he attacked Hitler, and he warned Germany against slipping into this idolatrous cult, he called it, of the Führer, which means leader, who could very well turn into a Verführer, which meant misleader or seducer. And he was cut off midstream of a sentence and cut off on air. And it's quite unclear as to why he was cut off, but we can maybe imagine why he was cut off. Bonhoeffer raised the first voice of church resistance to Hitler's plan of euthanasia and genocidal program to take out the Jewish people. He said this: "We must not simply bandage the victims under the wheel, but jam the spokes of the wheel itself." So look, there's a long, long story here. Erich Metaxas wrote a book called Bonhoeffer. It's about 2 inches thick, and worth the read, though. It's worth the read. Amazing book. And yeah, I encourage you to do that. But shortening it up, in November 1932, 2 months before the Nazi takeover, there had been an election of church officials in the German Protestant historical established churches. But it was marked by a struggle within the body of Christ, and it was just being threatened to blow up into a bunch of schisms. And so in July 1933, Hitler made a new election of all these churches, and he made himself head of the church. The Fuhrer would be the head of the church. And he basically got a bunch of Nazi supporting leaders to be the head of the state church. There was a few churches that stood against this, Protestant churches, Lutheran churches of Bavaria, Hanover, and Württemberg. In opposition to the Nazis, though, Bonhoeffer urged a stop to all pastoring, baptisms, weddings, funerals, etc. Karl Barth, who was a theologian at the same time and though didn't always agree with Bonhoeffer, worked with him. He said this was too much of a radical response and that it wouldn't go over well. So, but there was much work on the part of Bonhoeffer and Karl Barth to really help the churches, the people together to learn biblically based Christian living, teaching, beliefs, practices, to try to live out their faith in the midst of these the terrible atrocities that were being propagated by the Nazi regime. At the same time, there was a lot of infighting within the church, and that was sad. A lot of polarization, a lot of views going about what should be done about the evil government and their regime that was happening there, and all the anti-Semitic views. Well, again, to make a very long story short, Bonhoeffer was arrested in April 1943 by the Gestapo. He was imprisoned in this place called Tegel prison for a year and a half, and he was condemned to death on April 8, 1945, condemned by the SS without witnesses, without really a trial, without a record of proceedings, without an ability to give a defense. And they stripped him of his clothing and marched him naked into the execution yard, where he was hanged with 6 others. They were all accused of a plot against, to kill, to take out, to assassinate Hitler. His brother Klaus and his brother-in-law Rüdiger were executed in Berlin on the night of April 22nd and 23rd of that year, and his other brother-in-law Hans was executed in another concentration camp in Bavaria. What could I say? They were when Bonhoeffer was executed, it was 2 weeks before the soldiers of the U.S. Army, the infantry of 90th and the 97th Infantry Division came in and liberated the camp. It was just 3 weeks before the Soviets captured Berlin, and it was a month before the total surrender of Nazi Germany. He was executed just 2 weeks before these guys liberated the camp. I say again, Hebrews 12, 1 and 2. Therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off every weight and every sin that so easily clings to us, entangles us, trips us up. Let us run with endurance the race set out for us, keeping our eyes fixed on Jesus Christ, the author and the finisher of our faith, who for the joy set before him endured the cross, despising its shame, and now seated at the right hand of the throne of God. Let's run our race as best we can in the situations that we are living in to represent Christ well. Our community is looking for him, whether they know it or not.